about food as prevention for cardiovascular disease. So if I say something you don't understand, feel free to stick up your hand. It's not a huge group, and I'll explain. Other questions perhaps best kept till the end, otherwise we'll probably end up going a bit off track. So they always want us to have a conflict of interest slide, as in money from pharmaceutical companies, etc., etc. But funnily enough, since I got into food as medicine, they quit asking me to do talks and everything. But anyway, won my Extreme Foundation last year, and we're not actually discussing medications. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the role of diet in the prevention and treatment of heart disease, atherosclerotic heart disease, as well as risk factors, the role of food as medicine in treating the actual risk factors. And then we're going to look at what's the most effective dietary intervention to try and control and or prevent and or reverse these diseases. All right, so this is a table listing the causes of death in the USA in 2013. I'm just going to give you a minute to kind of read through that and get a feel. Male on the left, female on the right. Top 10 causes of death. I was a little surprised about the Alzheimer's being number 2 myself. But, oh, as an aside, the best way to prevent that is exercise. Anyway, so this is a list of the risk factors for those top 10 causes of death. And I have written in red the ones that are diet and lifestyle related. So as you can see, the majority, 70% or more of the risk factors for the top 10 causes of death are actually diet and lifestyle related. So these are choices we can make or changes that we can make in our lives. So I think that's an optimistic thing. I think that's a plus. So I'll be talking a bit about kind of medical studies, and just to give people a little bit of background, this is kind of the hierarchy of medical evidence. Basically, the lower levels are not very good evidence if you're trying to figure out causality or especially if a treatment is effective. And basically, above the red line, that's where you can get decent quality studies. So animal research, people's opinions, case reports is where they just kind of report a few cases of a disease. A case series is, say, like let's say we're looking at diet and colon cancer. So someone might just kind of write up 25 patients with colon cancer and kind of ask them about their diet and write that down. So that would be a case series. And it's hard to really understand if there's a connection in there. A case control study for, say, diet and colon cancer, let's say you wondered if red meat causes it, which contributes to it for sure. You take 100 patients who have colon cancer, you take 100 patients who don't have colon cancer, then you'd analyze their 2 diets and you'd compare the diets between those who had colon cancer and those who didn't. And you'd see if there were differences. And if you saw that on average people who had colon cancer ate twice as much red meat, then it would raise a question. The problem with a case control study or that type of approach is ideally the patient should be identical in every way except for having the disease of interest, but it's incredibly hard to pick the control patients and not know they're not different in another way, which is why I kind of put it below the line. Above that is something called a cohort study. So a cohort study, looking at the same question, what you might do is you might say, well, let's look at the graduating class from high school in Hamilton from 1985. And we basically, so in 1985, if you approached all of them, you got them to agree to be in a study, and you basically got them to start writing down their diet every year from 1985, and you followed them forwards in time, and then you saw who got colon cancer and who didn't. So you basically have the same information. You had the diet, and you know who did and didn't have colon cancer. But firstly, because you're asking them about their diet before they get colon cancer, you get far better data. Once you talk to someone with colon cancer and say, oh, well, tell me about your diet. How much red meat did you eat? Basically, there's something called recall bias. People basically change their answers because they've done a bunch of reading on the internet and they heard that red meat might be a risk factor, so some of them might actually inflate how much they have. And they're not doing it necessarily on purpose. Some of them might kind of downplay it. But if you get the data first and then you see who gets something, it removes that whole thing. And then the second thing is because you've got everyone into your cohort study at the beginning, there are far fewer differences between the people, and so you can see it's a more powerful way to see causality, which is really what we're interested in. You know, does this cause that? So cohort studies can actually give you pretty good indication. Certainly, there are multiple cohort studies and multiple populations, and then you can do some basic science stuff to prove that there's a biological plausibility. So that's above the line. A randomized controlled trial. Most people are probably familiar with this. You know, you take whatever, you take 100 people with a disease, so 100 people who say have had a heart attack happen to get this new drug, happen to get a sugar pill, and then you just see how many people get a second heart attack. That's what a randomized control trial. Because you randomly allocate people to the two groups, the only difference is your intervention, so that can prove causality. And then there's something called a meta-analysis. A meta-analysis is basically where you statistically summarize multiple studies. So you take a whole bunch of studies and you basically combine the numbers. And that's an even higher level of evidence because one study might have a bit of a bias, but if you have 6 studies, the biases often tend to balance out. So there you go. So that'll give you a bit of a feel for that. So important safety information if you're making lifestyle changes. So I call my talk Food is Prevention for cardiovascular disease, but it can actually reverse it. It can actually make it go away. So if you happen to change your diet and you have high blood pressure, for example, and your diet makes you no longer have high blood pressure, if you're on pills for your high blood pressure, you will now have low blood pressure because of the pills. And so the dose will need to be changed. So the two things, so some people might not realize that they might think they're on heart drugs, but actually those drugs affect their blood pressure. And then diabetes is also a big issue. So if you're diabetic and if you're on pills and if your diabetes goes away, now the pills that were meant to lower your blood sugar still will, and you'll have a low blood sugar. So always let your physician know you're making diet changes. It's not going to sneak up on you. Basically the clue is the side effect of this diet is weight loss. So if you notice that you're losing weight, make sure to tell your physician, so they might have to decrease the doses, or who knows, maybe even stop some of your medications. Okay, and then supplements are probably actually almost a way of life for us now with the food supply, but basically neither animals nor plants make vitamin B12, only bacteria make B12. The reason that B12 is in animal products is basically because it's contaminated with the animal species. But if you're not eating animal products, then you need to take B12. It's right on my website, which I think you all now have. It's basically we take 2 milligrams a week, 1 pill on Saturday, 1 pill on Sunday. And you might want to consider other supplements. If you're Canadian, you might want to consider a vitamin D supplement. And then omega-3 is also becoming, there's some new data on heart disease that actually implies that it might actually be good for heart disease. But yeah, so those are things, and it's all on my supplement page on my website. So just to put things in context, I find as I get older, I always want to put things in context. How important is lifestyle overall? So here's an interesting study. It's called the Nurses' Health Study. It's one of the biggest studies that has ever done. And basically they followed 78,000 nurses and 44,000 male healthcare professionals for about 30 years. Now, in this particular study, they published a lot of papers based on this group of people. In this particular study, they wondered, does lifestyle affect how long you live? So to get into this study, people had to be healthy at the beginning, and every 4 years, they would basically mail them 200 questions or so about their diet and about any diseases that they might have got. So up front, they thought, okay, well, these 5 lifestyle matters, we think they might make a difference to life expectancy. So, never smoking, having a normal body mass index, doing 30 or more minutes of exercise a day, not abusing alcohol, and having a healthy diet. And they basically said yes, no for each of those, and they give people a score from 0 to 5. So I'm going to presume people understand what 1 to 4 mean. So the real question is what's a healthy diet, of course. So for this particular study, the people would get points based on how much vegetables, fruits, nuts, whole grains, unsaturated fats, and omega-3s they ate, and they would lose points based on how much red meat, processed meat, or sugar-sweetened beverage they got. So they kind of get a score for that, and then they just turn it into a 0 or a 1 above a certain threshold. Okay, so people would end up with a score of 0 to 5. So what did they find? Well, for women at the age of 50, if the woman had none of these things right, she'd live to the age of 79. If she did 5 of these things right, she'd live to the age of 93. So that is a 14-year difference in life expectancy. And for men, the difference in life expectancy is about 12 years. Then what they did is they just took each of those categories and they just broke it down into, instead of just yes, no for cigarette smoking, they'd have 5 different levels of cigarette smoking. And so for exercise, instead of yes, no for exercise, they grade it on a scale of 0 to 5. That made this whole thing more sensitive. Once they did that, the lowest score versus the highest score was a 22-year difference in life expectancy. For me, I mean, that's the difference between seeing your grandchild born and being at their wedding. I mean, that's pretty big. So, in my opinion, this should be maybe broadcast to the public. Yeah, anyway. So here, for example, is some of the data from here. So for a 50-year-old woman who did 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 of these things right, how many years of life would she gain? Well, at 2 years, if she did one thing right, she gained just over 2 years of life at the age of 50. 2 things right, she gained 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, 14 years. So, you know, just doing those things. And as you can see, obviously, as you get older, you gain less years of life doing these things. Let's look at the exercise. Let's flip to men for a minute. So for a 50-year-old man, this is how many hours of moderately intense exercise someone does each week. If you do 1 hour, up to 3.5 hours, up to 6 hours. As you can see, even when you do 1 hour of moderately intense exercise, you gain over 2 years of life expectancy. And as you increase your amount of exercise, you go up to 6 or 7 or 8, well, more than 7 years of life gain. So there you go. Based on an even bigger, like composite data from multiple studies, as you increase your amount of exercise from 2.5 to 5 hours per week, the all-cause mortality, so causes of death from all causes, goes down by close to 40%. Yeah.
Did this just look at mortality, or when the participants were in the study, did it look at quality of life while you were living?
No, this particular thing just looked at actual mortality, although it's generally felt that quality of life is better when one's alive than when one's dead. No, but it's true. You're right. Quality of life is, yeah, they used it as a surrogate.
Yeah, I see a lot of clients who don't have a good quality of life.
Right. But of course, being healthy tends to enhance that. Yes, but it's a good point. You're right. So does lifestyle work in real life? So that's kind of a study where people know they're being observed. So here's data from about the 1980s and early 1990s from different countries. So each pair of bars goes with a country. So here are the names of the countries. So in the light gray bar is the percentage of deaths in each country due to either heart disease or cancer. And in the dark gray bar, it's the percentage of calories in that country that come from unrefined plant foods. Does anyone see a pattern? So the countries that get most of their calories from unrefined plant foods, like Thailand and Laos, have very low rates of death from heart disease and cancer. Whereas, conversely, the countries that get most of their calories from other foods have a high rate. And the interesting thing is this data is from the 80s and 90s. Well, you say, well, that's you're just observing that. You don't know the two are connected. But interestingly, now these countries are having westernized diets. And guess what? They're getting the Western diseases. Guess which country now has the world's highest rate of diabetes?
India.
They have 100 million diabetics, so that's close. But on a percentage basis, there's a country that has a higher rate.
China?
Interestingly, it's Saudi Arabia. Can anyone guess why? Go on.
No alcohol.
Well, that's a great point, but they've been no alcohol for a while. So that has not changed, but the rate has changed. It's actually called weapons of mass destruction. Can anyone guess what the weapons of mass destruction are?
McDonald's? Oh,
Yes,
wow.
they have adopted our westernized fast food, and they love it over there, but it does not love them. Anyway, so let's zoom in one country, Finland. So back in 1969, 1970, Finland had one of the highest rates of death from heart disease in the world. And they decided to do something about it, but they decided to take a different approach. Instead of going the medical model approach, where you're giving a bunch of drugs and stuff, they took a public health approach. So what their public health approach was is they picked an area in Finland where it was particularly bad, called North Karelia. It tells me it was a little like Hamilton. But anyway, they decided to address. So a public health approach means they would use advertising, industry got involved, advertising things to their workers. So it's basically education. And they wanted to address three things. They wanted people to cut down smoking, they wanted people to exercise more, and they wanted people to eat more fruits and vegetables because they were very low in their fruits and vegetables. So they started doing this and they started seeing results since they thought, okay, this is good. So they decided to apply this program to the whole country. And over the next 36 years, this is what happened. So this is the green line is the North Karelia, but I'm going to focus on all of Finland, which is the black line. So between 1969 and 2006, the death rate in Finland due to heart disease per 100,000 population went from 500 people per 100,000 per year down to 100 people per 100,000 per year. So the heart disease mortality for a whole country decreased by 80%. I find that mind-blowing. They actually apparently had a program. They wanted to get, because there were a bunch of dairy farmers there. They were getting their dairy farmers to start growing berries instead of growing cows or whatever. So yeah, so berries, or whatever. Yeah, that was one of the programs they had. Anyway, amazing effect. So this is just heart disease because that's what they were targeting. But the beautiful thing about lifestyle is often it affects more than one system. So here's more data from this study. So all-cause mortality dropped by 60%. Cardiovascular mortality, as we saw, dropped basically by 80%. But look at this, death from all cancers dropped by 65% as well. So not only did the heart disease go down, but the death from cancer did. And since, of course, they were targeting smoking, it's no surprise that lung cancers decreased by even more. But like I say, even if you looked at every cause of death in the country, it was down by 62%. I think that's quite impressive. Okay, so continuing on our thoughts about heart attacks. So what are the major risk factors for heart attacks? This is a huge study where they basically took, and this actually is a case control study, where they took 15,000 people from, I think, 32 countries around the world who were having their first heart attack, and then 15,000 people from the same countries who weren't having a heart attack. And they basically looked at data on these different factors in these people. So were they smokers? Did they have diabetes? So the people who had the heart attack were called the cases. The people who didn't have a heart attack were called controls. And so they looked at the rate of smoking in the cases versus the controls. So as you can see, the rate of, this is probably the rate of, let me get it right now, it's probably the rate of non-smoking, yeah, would be lower in the cases than in the controls. So then, what's the rate of diabetes? What's the rate of hypertension? Then they basically calculate something called an odds ratio, which is basically kind of how many times higher is it in the smokers than the non-smokers. So sorry, I don't know how easy it is to see the numbers, but the 2.0 means it's roughly twice as common, twice as likely to have a heart attack if you're a smoker than if you're a non-smoker. So for diabetes, it's a 2.4-fold increased risk. Green means that it was statistically significant, so almost everything was statistically significant. Then in the right-hand column, this is called population attributable risk. What proportion of the events in this population can be traced back to this risk factor? So approximately 36% of the heart attacks were due to smoking. Approximately 10% of the heart attacks were due to diabetes. When they added everything up, they felt they were able to explain about 90%. Now, it's a quirk of how they do this. If you were to add up the numbers, they add up to a bit more than 100. So it's not perfect, but it just gives you a rough feeling, a rough feel for how important each of these factors are. And so let's zoom in on the psychosocial, which is basically stress. So it said that it arranged about it was responsible for about 32% of the heart attacks, whereas diet, like vegetables and fruits, only 14%. Now, this is a case control study, and you remember I told you they're not the most accurate way to assess things. So we should take this data with a grain of salt. But let's try and tease out, like from this data, it looks like the psych factors are more important than diet. But maybe let's look at some other studies to see if we can get more insight. So here is some data actually from that tries to tease apart the role of stress versus diet. So in Norway, they're a very interesting, I don't know if you technically call it a natural experiment, but a very interesting experiment or something very interesting happened to Norway between about 1937 and 1945. And that was called World War II. So what happened to Norway is basically the Nazis invaded and took over Norway. And when they took over Norway, for some reason they basically felt that feeding their troops was more important than feeding the public population of Norway. So they basically took all of the farm animals and the meat and the this and that, and they diverted it to their troops, and they just left the Norwegians to eat what was left. And so basically, this is what happened. But the interesting thing about the Norwegians is, I guess they're really good. They're very good at keeping track of records. So they actually had data on the food that their population would have. So this is from the data. So here, for example, in 36 to 37, this is how many calories per day they would get on average. And during the war, 42 to 45, you can see there was an 18% drop in the average number of calories for the average civilian in Norway because of this. So here, for example, this is what got shunted to the troops. So there was less meat, whole milk, cream, margarine, cheese, and eggs. So what were they left with? They were left with more cereals, potatoes, vegetables, fish, and skim milk. So it's basically a shift towards a more carbohydrate-rich and more plant-based diet, but admittedly they did have a bit of fish and skim milk. However, the whole milk and cream and cheese went to the troops. Okay,
So
so
you're still getting lots of calories, the civilians, right?
well, yes, they're still getting 2,800.
Yeah,
Yeah, so they're getting a good amount of calories. That's right. So they weren't starving them.
Right.
Good point. So they could get alternatives. Excellent point. So fat went down by a lot, but when you look at what happened to the food, you can understand that. Protein went down by a bit. Interestingly, just as a slight aside, that's still, you only need 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. Anyway, so they still got plenty of protein. And then the carbs went up a bit, but something had to go up. So there you go. Okay, so what do you think? Do you think it would be stressful to have your country invaded by the Nazis? So I think we can probably agree that the level of stress in Norway probably went up during World War II. But as you can see, there was a shift in diet away from the animal products. So here, as I said, they keep good track of their numbers. So here's their data on death rates from cardiovascular disease. So the age-corrected stuff is in the dotted line. So see what happens, basically going up before World War II starts in 1939. And then when the Nazis come, it goes way, way down. But of course, as everyone's probably aware, the Nazis actually lost. So then they had to leave. So then at the end of the war, they were able to return to their previous diet. And so the interesting thing is, look what happens. So the stress goes away, the diet, quote, improves, but the rate of death from vascular disease goes right up. So this is, I think, quite an interesting natural experiment, which once again shows that really it probably looks, at least if you're considering, invasion by then, stress is outweighed by diet. So once again, I think this is a very positive thing, because you can kind of control your stress, but it's perhaps easier to control your diet than your level of stress. So there you go. Okay, so with that as an introduction, let's look at the role of meat. So this is actually the same nurses' health study, but they're asking a slightly different question here. So don't be surprised. So 37 male healthcare professionals, 83,000 nurses. They're free of cardiovascular disease and cancer to get in. Every 4 years they get this big questionnaire, and then they adjust for other risk factors for mortality. And please look at the definition of a portion of meat, and I put a little picture there to help you. So a portion of meat in this study is 3 ounces of meat, which is roughly the size of a deck of playing cards. That is equivalent to 1 hot dog, 2 slices of bacon. So it's not a lot of meat. I mean, I don't know how many people back in the day when I was eating meat, I would have a bigger portion than that on my plate. I assure you. Anyway, so that's a portion of meat. So these are the things they adjusted for in terms of mortality. So they adjusted for energy intake, how much fruit and veg people had, their age, their weight, their race, whether they were smoker or not, how much alcohol they had, their physical activity, did they take aspirin or multivitamins, did they have a family history of diabetes or heart attack or cancer, did they have diabetes or high blood pressure, and for the women they adjusted for their menopausal status. So they adjusted for an awful lot of things, and this is what they found. So what they did is they broke people's meat intake by quintile. Quintile means 20%. So they looked at the people who had the lowest 20% of meat intake, next 20%, next 20%, next 20%, and then the highest 20% of meat intake. And so here, this red thing, that's the top quintile, and then you set the bottom quintile as equal to 1, or 100%. So here you can see that for men, those in the top quintile had approximately a 30 to 35% increase rate of cardiovascular mortality. And for the women, it was actually over 40% increased rate of cardiovascular mortality. Now for anyone who's interested, this is how many portions of meat per day was in each quintile. So in the lowest quintile, it was between a quarter and a half portion of meat a day. And in the top quintile, it's 2 portions of meat a day. So that's basically the equivalent of 2 packs of playing cards worth of meat a day. That's not a lot of meat. But even that small amount of meat is associated with about a 35% increase in heart mortality for the men, and a 40% increase in heart mortality for the women. But as they say on the TDS, that's not all. If we look at total mortality, so this is death from all causes, for men the top quintile is again about 35% up, and for women the top quintile is about 25% up. So all causes of mortality are affected by how much meat the people in the study eat. So what about the effect of just increasing your meat intake by 1 serving per day? Now, here the bars have changed. Now it's broken down by the type of meat. So unprocessed meat, that's like, I guess, a steak or chicken, whereas processed meat, so that would be the equivalent of wieners and bacon and stuff. So for total mortality, you can see that per 1 serving per day increase of unprocessed meat, there's about a 12% increase in your risk of total mortality. But if it's 1 portion of processed meat, it's a 20% increase in risk. So hopefully you see that in each of these cases, the processed meat is really quite a bit worse. Cardiovascular mortality, it's about a 17% versus a 22% increase for unprocessed versus processed meat. For cancer mortality, it's a 10% versus, I think that's about a 15% increase in mortality. So that's just the effect of 1 serving a day. So there is a dose response curve, and well, the less we eat, the better. And I got into all of this when I was trying to avoid my diabetes, so I was feeling a little So this is showing a dose response curve for all case mortality. Because whenever you see data like that, you say, well, if it's causal, if it makes it happen, then there should be a fairly straight line relationship, or at least there should be a line relationship. Higher doses should be worse. So here you can see both for men, this is how many servings a day, 1, 2, or 3, and here's the risk of all-cause mortality. Or for women, there really is a pretty convincing, pretty straight line relationship between dose of meat and all-cause mortality. So that makes the evidence a little bit stronger. Okay, here's a completely different way of looking at the same thing. So this is a meta-analysis of multiple studies looking at the same question. So these populations were from each study looked at one population. So England, Germany, California, America, Netherlands, and Japan. So 7 different studies were summarized. Total number of people in all the studies was 124,000. So overall, when they summarized all the data, they found a statistically significant reduction of 29% in heart disease mortality and an 18% reduction in cancer mortality. Both of these were significant. We used 5% as a threshold for that. And there was a non-significant, but probably clinically important, decrease in all-cause mortality, cardiovascular, circulatory mortality, and stroke-related mortality. So once again, the vegetarians in this 7 different areas from around the world in 124,000 people, there's a relationship there. So that supports that. So it might lead to a question, well, how much am I supposed to eat? How many fruits and vegetables am I supposed to eat if I want to get these health benefits? So here I found some nice dose response curves. So I won't bore you with the details of this, but this is what a meta-analysis is. That's how it's reported. Each line there is a different study, and then at the bottom is the summary result of all of these studies. And basically, as long as that little mark doesn't overlap the line, you know it's significant. So this shows that for every 200 grams per day of total fruits and vegetables, if you're looking at heart disease mortality, there's actually an 8% decrease in mortality for just, I guess, about half a pound a day. And here's a simple dose response curve, which you might find easier. This is 100 grams of fruits and veggies per day, 400 grams, 700. And as you can see, there's an absolute straight line relationship. The more fruits and vegetables, the lower your coronary heart disease mortality. And it looks like it actually keeps on going even up to 800 grams a day. Like, what is that? That's over 1.5 pounds of fruits and vegetables. Okay, so that is heart disease mortality. Let's look at all-cause mortality. Here again is the dose response curve. And if you look at it carefully, there's two lines. There's a steep line and then there's a more shallow line. So what that shows you is at the lower doses, there's an even stronger relationship, decreasing your all-cause mortality. And here are the actual numbers. So if you prefer, you can just see, well, when does the risk stop decreasing? Well, it seems to stop around here, 71%, so that's 29% reduction, a 30% reduction, 31% reduction. So this is around 800 grams a day. So it looks like you probably want to be eating about 800 grams a day. Oh, well, if I'm eating that much fruit and vegetables, I won't have any room left for bacon or wieners. Okay, so what about total cancer? Well, same again. As you can see, it plateaus out a little earlier on, but once again, there's about a 14% reduction up at about 800 grams a day. So whether you're looking at heart mortality, total mortality, or cancer mortality, the relationships are all the same. So drugs usually target one thing, but the nice thing about diet is it seems to protect you against a whole bunch of things. So here in this study, they figured out, okay, well, how many lives would we save? So if Canadians were to eat 800 grams a day, so this is Canada-specific data from the study, if they were to eat 800 grams a day of fruits and vegetables, they would decrease the mortality rate from heart disease by about 17%, strokes by about 41%, cancer by about 8%. So basically about 17%, so that would be what's it, that's about 1 in 7, yeah, yeah, 1 in 7 deaths, or more actually, would be avoided in Canada if people ate 800 grams a day of fruits and vegetables. So I think that's an optimistic note. Yeah. So, now that you've seen a whole bunch of epidemiologic data, let's look at some actual interventions. If this is true, we should be able to make a difference by changing people's diet. So here's a classic study that came out in 2013 to look at trying to prevent cardiovascular disease or heart attacks. Primary prevention means that the population you're looking at hasn't had a heart attack yet. So they took 7,400 people who had not had a heart attack, but were at increased risk of having a heart attack because they were either diabetic or they had 3 out of the following risk factors. They were smokers, hypertensive, had abnormal lipids, they were overweight, or they had a family history. So these are people at an increased risk of having a heart attack, and they randomized them to 1 of 3 diets. One is, quote, you need to watch how much dietary fat you eat. So avoid, basically that's the standard doctor advice for 30 seconds. The other group, group 2, was a Mediterranean diet with olive oil, and they would literally give them 1 liter of olive oil in a container every week to take home, and ask them to use 4 tablespoons of olive oil a day. And then the third group was on a Mediterranean diet with nuts. So they'd literally give them, basically, what's that? That's an ounce of nuts for each day of the week. And so it's a combination of walnuts, hazelnuts, and almonds. And their primary outcome was the rate of major cardiovascular events, which is heart attack, stroke, or death from cardiovascular causes. So that's what they did. So here's the data. So the lines almost look parallel, so you have to kind of enlarge them. But what you can see here, as they enlarge that, is for fairly early on, like certainly about 6 months, the lines separate, and the rate of vascular events from is lower in both the virgin olive oil group and the nut group, and that stays up. So there's a fairly prompt and convincing separation, and the hazard ratio of the overall risk was about 30% lower. So that was one study that I think got people quite excited. And of course, the Mediterranean diet has more fruits and vegetables than the standard diet. So I always like to put stuff in context. So I dug around to find studies of aspirin for preventing your first heart attack. I looked at studies of statins for preventing your first heart attack, and I put it in comparison to the results of this study. So here is basically the percentage difference based on results. So here, aspirin decreases the risk by about 0.24%. Statins decrease the risk by about 0.4%. I think people are under the impression that it's huge difference. Well, 0.4% you decide. But the Mediterranean diet, it's a difference of between 0.6 and 1%. But it's at least as good. Actually, it's quite a bit better than either aspirin or statins. That's why diet's important. Yeah. Okay, change the population. Now let's look at people who've had a heart attack. If you can prevent a heart attack with it, then people who already had a heart attack, maybe you can prevent a second heart attack. So this is what this next study looks at. They took 423 people who had a heart attack. They randomized them to a Mediterranean diet versus do what your doctor tells you. They followed them for 4 years, and we're just going to look at composite outcome number 1, which is either having a heart attack or death from cardiovascular cirrhosis. So here you can see, once again, the lines separate very nicely, and there's a risk reduction of 10% in these events. That means for every 10 people you treat, you prevent 1 event. That's actually much bigger than the other one. You remember in the other study, the difference was like 1%. This is now a difference of 10%. That's because these people are at a higher risk of having a heart attack because they've already had one. But it's a big difference, I think, it's a non-needed to treat of 10. So let's put it in context. Yeah, sure. So here are studies of aspirin to prevent a second heart attack, studies of beta blockers to prevent a second heart attack, and studies of statins to prevent a second heart attack. The results are basically better, if you ask me. They're clearly better than. So why this doesn't get pushed, I will never understand. Well, I do understand, but we won't go there. Okay, so let's look at the role of a heart healthy diet. Do you have to go all the way? Do you really have to have 800 grams of fruits and vegetables? What about if I just improve my diet a bit? Well, that sounds reasonable enough, doesn't it? So here's something called the Women's Health Initiative, and that was the goal. Would a dietary intervention to a low-fat, high-fruit and vegetable diet decrease cancer and cardiovascular risk? Let's not go crazy and go vegan, but let's just do a little bit of improvement. Okay, so it's a huge study. 48,000 women, postmenopausal, followed them for 8 years. 40% of them were randomized to this intervention, which interestingly, so they're told to change their diet and increase their fruits, vegetable, and whole grains. And they do, interestingly note, they do group visits. It's the best way to change lifestyle. And then they have maintenance visits 4 times a year for out to 8 years. The other group were basically given a little pamphlet of this is what a healthy diet is, thank you, have a nice day. Okay. So here is looking at the difference in nutrients at 6 years, and they did get some results. Sorry, there's a lot of data here, but here, for example, you can see energy intake. You can see the difference between the intervention and control group was about 114 calories a day, so it was a bit lower in the intervention group, and all of these are significant. So total fat, they said they wanted to get down to 20% of fat. Average Canadian diet is 30 to 35% of calories from fat. They didn't get all the way they wanted to. They got down to 28% of calories for fat. That number will come up a little later. The control group is 37, so it wasn't a huge difference. They didn't get what they wanted. Fiber intake, note this. The difference in fiber intake between the two groups was only 2.4 grams. Forgive me, that is pathetic. Like, that is like a quarter of a cup of beans. So this incredibly expensive study, which spent millions and millions and millions of dollars to try to get people to moderately improve their diet, didn't do much. But anyways, vegetables and fruits, there was a difference in 1.1 portions per day of vegetables and fruits. Once again, that's a bit of a difference, but not a huge difference. And interestingly, for some reason, the intervention group actually took less nuts, which might be a bit of a biasing factor. But anyway, okay. So when you look at the changes in outcomes out of 3 years, light green means it was significant. So you can see that, yes, there was a difference in weight, but the difference in weight was 1.3 kilograms. So what's that? It's getting close to 3 pounds. Not huge, but there you have it. Comparison in something called the Broad study, which is the biggest study of the whole food plant-based diet that was ever done, which was randomized. There was a difference of over 10 kilograms in the people who went whole food plant-based as against 1.3 anyway, but this is a more moderate approach. Okay, physical activity was a bit better in the intervention group. Diastolic blood pressure went down by about 0.3 millimeters. There was a bit of a difference in total cholesterol and LDL cholesterol, so there was a bit of a difference. Okay, this is what happened to the rate of cardiovascular events. Basically, zero. There's really no difference. What is this? Heart attack, death from heart disease, or having a coronary artery bypass graft, and here is stroke. So when you do moderation, everyone loves to believe doing everything in moderation, well, you get moderately null results. If you want to see a difference, you have to make a difference in the diet. And making a difference of just 1.1 portions of fruits and vegetables per day is not enough, sorry. So there you go. So there's an 8.2% decrease in total fat intake, which was less than they said they aimed for. They increased by 1.1 servings per day. Overall, no significant reduction in cardiovascular disease or stroke. Then they do something called data dredging, where they basically start scraping the bottom of the barrel to see if they can find a difference anywhere. So if you're in the lowest portion of saturated fat, there's about a 20% difference there. If lowest trans fat, which fortunately now is pretty much outlawed, there's a 20% decrease. And those who had the highest intake of vegetables had a 12% decrease. So this is what's called basically going back afterwards and sifting through your data. It's kind of now, why was there so little effect, you ask? Well, do you remember I said how much fiber per day they were having? This is the amount of fiber per day in this Women's Health Initiative. The other bars are from a group of people called Seventh-day Adventists. That is a religious group where they're told good Seventh-day Adventists shouldn't be having any meat or fish. But you see, like most religions, some of them listen and some of them don't. So it makes them a perfect group to do studies on. So this is data from, I think, 70,000 different Seventh-day Adventists, and they broke them down into non-vegetarians, as in those who didn't follow their religion, semi-vegetarians who have meat, I think it's 1 time a week, pesco-vegetarians, that's no red meat, but they would have fish. The lacto-ovo-vegetarians, which means they'd have no meat or fish, but they would have milk and eggs. And then the vegans, which I presume everyone knows means no animal products. So what the reason I put this data out is you see that even the non-vegetarian Seventh-day Adventists, they had way more fiber than the intervention group in the Women's Health Initiative. They had almost twice as much fiber as the supposed treatment group in the Women's Health Initiative. So it partly probably shows the difference. Well, that's the American diet. Basically, this multi-million-dollar study, the change in diet was pathetic. Because, the vegans actually almost had 3 times as much fiber. Fiber is a marker for fruits and vegetables. There is no fiber in animal products. There is no fiber in meat, or in fish, or in eggs, or in dairy. So this is a good marker of how much fruits and vegetables, because that's the only place people get fiber. So it just shows that this very expensive study that tried moderation really didn't do very much, but it's a great way to burn through millions of dollars. Okay, so what is the role of a low-fat vegetarian diet in coronary artery disease? Now, now we're getting into some more interventional studies. This is an amazing study by, Dr. Dean Ornish, published in 1990. So he wondered, he wasn't just looking at diet, does improving your lifestyle for a year improve the outcome in patients with atherosclerosis? So to get into the study, they took these people to a cath lab, they had angiograms, and they had to have significant disease of 1, 2, or 3 vessels. And then they randomized them, not a huge study, but they randomized them. The control group basically do what your doctor tells you. The intervention group was put on a low-fat vegetarian diet. So vegetarian, they were allowed an egg whites, and they were allowed 1 cup of non-fat milk or yogurt per day. So it's just vegetarian, plus moderate aerobic exercise, plus stress management, plus being told to stop smoking, plus having group support. So they followed these people for a year, and then they did another angiogram. They found good results, so then they followed them out to 5 years and did another angiogram. And that's the gold standard for heart disease, doing an angiogram, see how narrow the vessels are. And they actually had these angiograms blinded. They had them interpreted by people who didn't actually know which group the patients were in. So that's a very good way to do research when the person interpreting the results has no clue whether is this a lifestyle patient or a non-lifestyle patient. So it's a very well conducted study. What did they find? So this shows the amount of narrowing in the blood vessels. So the control group, that's baseline, that's 1 year, that's 5 years. So the amount of narrowing in the control group goes up out to 5 years. And the amount of narrowing in the treatment group goes down out to 5 years. And to be honest, the fact that it improved from 1 to 5 years, because I don't think they were really chasing them too much, it makes it even more impressive. And so they looked at the data of these people after 5 years, and I made a little chart so that you could see, compare the two groups. So the control group actually was doing 3 hours of exercise a week. That's a lot of exercise. So that's the interesting thing about studies. Once people know they're in a study, they tend to change their behavior. So even though the control group was told to kind of do what you're usually doing, I just can't believe that this group of people are really doing, on average, 3 hours a week, whereas the intervention group was doing a little more. They're doing 3.6 hours a week. How much time were they doing stress management? Because they were told to, per day, 8 minutes a day versus 49 minutes a day. What was their fat intake? This is really impressive. So what you see, the control group was 25%. That's pretty low for a control group. But look at the intervention group. This is totally impressive. 8.5% dietary fat intake. Because you remember in the previous study, they got down to 28% dietary fat. That was the multi-million-dollar study. Here, Dean Ornish got his people down to 8.5%. He literally locked them in a hotel for a week at the beginning to make them do the diet. Literally. I mean, it's kind of like cruise ships, right? But yeah, there you go. Cholesterol, the only source of cholesterol is animal products. So plants don't have it. So the amount of cholesterol a day is a good marker for how compliant these people were. On average, people are told to take, I think, about 300 milligrams a day. So here you can see, actually, once again, the control group were on a pretty healthy diet, 140 milligrams a day. And the intervention group was pretty much avoiding animal products because it's less than 19 milligrams a day. So it's a very low amount. So that's good. Their energy intake, interestingly, look, the experimental group was actually having more calories. So there you go. Okay. So then he looked at how well did people do, how well did they follow my instructions? What was their level of adherence? So here he broke these people down into low adherence, moderate adherence, or highly compliant with the intervention, and the change in the narrowing of their vessels. And here you can see this, once again, this is what we call a dose-response curve. The group that was the most adherent, who did what he told them to the best, had a much bigger change in their blood vessels, improvement, than the least adherent group. So once again, this shows that this was causal. He actually caused this thing to occur, because there's a dose-response curve. Okay, then what he did is so now that he proved that it worked, it was just a matter of, he figured out, hey, the government has to pay for this, because no one's going to pay for this themselves. So he fought Medicare in the USA for 10 years to get it covered by Medicare. After 10 years, they finally agreed to cover it. And then he published the results of just people going through this program. So this was now a program that you could go through and the government could pay for. So this is not a study anymore. It's not randomized. These are the results of 2,900 people who went through his program, his cardiac rehab program. And these are the changes in their triglycerides, their weight, their LDL, and I put in red those that are significant. So in 2,900 people in the real world who went through a real world program, you had significant improvements in triglycerides, body mass index, LDL cholesterol, blood pressure, total cholesterol. He was able to drop the amount of dietary fat that people were taking, and also get them to increase their amount of exercise. It's pretty impressive. Getting people, that's what, 3 hours a week of exercise. And then he actually did psychological measures on these people, and interestingly, even those improved. Now, this intervention, once again, it's not just diet, it's exercise, and it's small groups. And, sorry, human beings were meant to communicate with each other. And so that's why the hostility and the depression improves through participation in small groups. So I think that's very impressive. Okay, now what about actually preventing heart attacks? Or what about not people who've had heart attacks now? Can we use this as prevention? So I don't know if it comes up on TV with Geico. You know, that's the little lizard. It's Warren Buffett's insurance company. So they did a research study in his insurance company where they wanted to see if a low-fat, plant-based diet would improve risk factors for heart disease. So they did it at 10 different kiosk buildings all over America with these people who work for his insurance company. So they took 10 different sites and they convinced people to be in a randomized study for 18 weeks. So you got 291 people involved, and they wanted people who are at risk for heart disease, either due to an elevated body mass index or being diabetic. So they randomized them to either keep doing what you're doing, don't change your diet, so now this is pure diet, versus go on a low-fat, vegan or plant-based diet, plus a support group 1 hour per week. And in order to get this to work, they got the cafeterias to offer vegan options on their menus there. So 290 people were randomized for 18 weeks to see if this would make a difference. So here, for example, is changes in weight. So here you can see the people, they lost almost 3 kilograms, or 2.7. So that's 6 pounds of weight, which is much more than the control group. And of course, BMI, this is all significant. And if you look at changes in lipid, there were big drops in total cholesterol and LDL cholesterol, which were also significant. So not only people who've already had a heart attack, but now a vegan diet in a workplace setting can improve cholesterol and body weight. And here's the HbA1c. That averages your blood sugar for the previous 6 to 8 weeks. So it's a really good measure of either diabetes or risk of diabetes. And that dropped by 0.6%, which is actually excellent. That's similar to the drop you see with a lot of the oral drugs for diabetes. And it's because these people lost weight. That's why it happened. So yeah, highly effective at prevention. How does it work, you ask? Well, how does the whole food plant-based diet work? And if you want to prevent or reverse heart disease, you need to go whole food plant-based, but also low added oil or no added oil. And so how or why does that work, you ask? So here's a very interesting study they did on some people that gives us insight into how this works. So this is called flow-mediated dilation. So what they do is they randomize a group of subjects, I think it's about 20 subjects, to either have a low-fat breakfast or a regular or a high-fat breakfast. So the high-fat breakfast, I will confess, is what I used to love to do with my daughter on a Saturday. This high-fat breakfast was a sausage and egg McMuffin with hash browns. We used to love those. We used to go every week to you know where. So that was the high-fat breakfast. The low-fat breakfast was Cheerios and skimmed milk with orange juice. So they randomized people to those 2 breakfasts, and then what they did is they take a blood pressure cuff and they inflate the blood pressure cuff on their arm, and then there's an artery that comes through called the brachial artery, and they look at the size of the artery with an ultrasound. So they inflate the cuff so then the artery would shrink, and they inflate the cuff for 5 minutes, and then they'd release it. And then basically when you release the thing, of course the artery enlarges. Well, that is a measure of a bunch of things called nitric oxide and other things in your body. It shows how healthy your artery is. How much it relaxes. And so they wondered, will there be a difference in how much the artery relaxes in these 2 groups because it's a high-fat meal versus a low-fat meal. So what you can see here is at basically 2, 3, and 4 hours, there is significantly less dilatation in the artery in the high-fat group than the control group where it didn't change. Oh, so what does this mean? So what it means is if you have for breakfast sausage and egg McMuffin with hash browns, and then if for lunch you have a Big Mac with French fries, and then if you go home and you have roast beef on your plate, even with a few vegetables with butter poured over it, basically at 2, 3, and 4 hours after each meal, and actually really at 1 and 5 too, you look, but not statistically significant, the arteries don't dilate. So if you have 3 meals a day, which are high in fat, basically for all of your waking hours, your blood vessels don't dilate very well. Well, I don't care. Well, maybe you don't, but your heart does. And so, you know, whatever. If your supper meal was in a fancy restaurant and then they brought the bill, whoo, cardiac stress, right? And then now suddenly you get ischemia, you get chest pain or whatever. So this is part of the reason why, in particular for heart disease, you want to go to low fat. And basically, the plant-based diet is naturally fairly low in fat. And if you're interested, you will have a little piece of paper. I have videos on the website about how you can actually fry with no oil. Yeah.
So I'm just trying to understand. So the arteries dilating is good? Is that the
Yes, because when we need more blood, our arteries actually dilate. And actually, back in the 70s, they wondered, how does the body do this? What is it that mediates that? And the guy who figured it out got a Nobel Prize. It's nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is the mediator that causes the arteries to dilate. And interestingly, how do you produce nitric oxide? Basically, it's given off when you eat green leafy vegetables. It causes your body to release oxygen. So they're a natural vasodilator. Has anyone heard of nitroglycerin? Nitro spray? Yeah, it's the same. It's the nitric oxide. It's the same mechanism. So basically, when you eat green leafy vegetables, it's the equivalent of giving yourself a little sushi with nitro. And the only exception to that is beets. Beets also do it. So there you go. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So that's part of the mechanism or how this works. So I didn't used to be in this. So this is my diet back in the day. Actually, it's close to 6 or 7 years now. That's on the left-hand side. So bran flakes and granola for breakfast, a sandwich usually with ham or something, and a diet Coke for lunch, and you know, spaghetti bolognese, ground beef, or chicken curry for supper. So that was back then. So now this is breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So right on my website, I have my oats, chia, and blueberry breakfast recipe. The change we've made to lunch is it's now kale salad with nuts and some sort of beans, legumes, or lentils, because 20 grams a day decreases mortality by 6 to 8%. Yep.
How much chia and how much flax?
So it's right on the webpage. So it's 2 tablespoons of ground flax per person, and basically 1 tablespoon of ground chia. And flaxseed has to be ground to work for what you asked. Well, in a randomized study of women with breast cancer waiting for surgery who got flaxseed versus no flaxseed, same amount, 2 tablespoons a day, when they had their surgery, the cancers were growing more slowly in the women who got the flaxseed. So in just 37 days, flaxseed, among other things, slows the rate of growth of breast cancer. Oh, what about the men? Good question. So in a study of men with prostate cancer randomized to regular fat diet, low fat diet, flaxseed, no flaxseed, the low fat group, the PSA, which is a cancer marker, went down, but the flaxseed group went down even more. So I'm assuming that more than 99% of the population would therefore benefit from flaxseed, and nothing else does this. So it's 2 tablespoons of ground flaxseed a day. We just use a spice grinder, but you can use a coffee grinder, you can buy it ground. Yeah, I think everyone should be on 2 tablespoons of flaxseed a day. If you make a smoothie, you can throw it in there. Good question. All right.
You should refrigerate it too.
Yes, there's a question about whether it decays with time. So if it's ground, it's best refrigerated or even put in the freezer. Absolutely. But if you don't grind it, it's stable on its own. Yeah.
Is it the omega-3 in the flaxseed?
No, it's something called lignans. So lignans are actually something called estrogen. So basically, it's kind of cute. So the lignans get metabolized by your gut bacteria into something called estrogen partial agonists, so they're hormonally active. So the reason that it works in those 2 cancers, breast cancer and prostate cancer, is those are hormonally mediated cancers. And so it basically, yeah, so it takes the lignans, which are not in flax oil, so I think flax oil is a waste of money and time. It's not in the oil, it's in the flax, and you need gut bacteria as well, but we all have gut bacteria. Good question. Cool. Oh, so here's my website, and basically it takes you through where do I get my protein, what about supplements, should I waste money on organic, and basically you get less pesticides, so you might want to. What am I supposed to eat for breakfast? What am I supposed to eat for lunch? It links you to hundreds and hundreds of recipes. There's actually a version of this talk on there as well. It's got tons of stuff actually, and actually there's a whole bunch of stuff that I don't even link you to, so just type something like asparagus and see what happens. You'd be amazed. Yeah, I just have links to tons and tons of stuff. And for those of you who are already kind of into this, what's the next level, you ask? The next level is getting the right balance of plant-based products every day. So this is Michael Greger's Daily Dozen, and you can just go to Google and get this. This is a free app, and this is for each circle is how many portions a day you should probably have for optimal health. And like I said, they did a multinational study of 700 people from 7 different countries who were aged 70 or older. They just looked at their diet and they looked at who lived and who died, and they wondered, does diet affect life expectancy? Only one food group affected who lived and who died, and that food group was the beans, the legumes, and the lentils. That's why and it was just 20 grams of those a day was associated with a decrease in mortality of 6 to 8%. 20 grams a day, that's less than an ounce. That's why he recommends 3 portions of beans, legumes, and lentils, which most people who aren't into this aren't into. And so what we actually do at home, I sit on my butt and write and make slides, but I do why she cooks a pot full of chickpeas or beans or legumes, drains them, and we just got a rack of 500cc mason jars at Canadian Tire, and you just drain them and stick them in the freezer so that you can just take them out as you need them. So you've got a whole bunch, right? Because it takes a long time to cook chickpeas. She claims that the Instant Pot has changed her life. So because now, instead of having to stand over the thing for hours, a pot on a stove, she just pushes a button and walks away. And so it just makes it a lot easier for her. And that goes on sale several times a year for less than $100 for what it's worth. So that's the suggested way to get it. I mean, you basically add it to whatever. Okay, if you're having rice as a side for supper, you add some beans to the rice, and I link you to tons of recipes. But there you go. Okay, and then so 1 portion of berries, 3 portions of other fruits, 1 portion of cruciferous vegetables. They have specific anti-cancer effects. 2 portions of other greens, 2 portions of other vegetables, 1 portion of flax seeds for the reasons which we have covered, I hope. Nuts, 1 portion, spices, 3 portions of whole grains, which actually is surprisingly hard to get. But one of the easiest whole grains, if you want a whole grain, is quinoa, because that's a whole grain. It's very hard to get whole grain bread with significant whole grains. Anyway, beverages and exercise thrown in. So basically, so that's basically a copy of what you have in your hand. But there you go. And then his latest book, his first book is How Not to Die, which covers the role of food in the top 15 causes of death, and then goes over the different foods. His latest book that came out in December is How Not to Diet. And it's kind of aimed at weight loss, but I'm actually up to about page 100 in it. Oh, it's mind-blowing too, but it talks a lot about toxins. You would not believe how we are being poisoned by the stuff we have put into our environment. It's endless. The stuff, the endocrine modifiers, the hormones, and the antibiotics. Like I gave a talk on December the 20th on something called microplastic, tiny pieces of plastic. Guess how many pieces of plastic you either eat or inhale in a 12-year period. Sorry, in a 1-year period. How many microplastic particles in a year? Do you think it's 100? Do you think it's 1,000?
More.
It's 100,000 particles a year. And the top 2 sources are the air, good luck with changing that, and basically those little plastic water bottles that everyone picks up at Costco, you know, the clear little plastic bottles that they give out to their friends when people come over. Yeah, those are the top 2 sources. Anyway, sorry, I digress. Questions? Yeah, that's a good time. Good time. Good time, about an hour. Any questions? Yes.
So I follow a whole food plant-based diet,
Yeah.
and my doctor is a cardiologist, Dr. Williams. I'm not sure if you know.
Oh yes, there's a plant-based cardiologist out in Bracebridge. Which,
exactly.
yes,
I
he's
see
amazing.
it because I have high blood pressure.
Hmm?
I have high blood pressure, and he recommended that I eliminate nuts, seeds, and avocado and olive, just like Dr. Esselstyn
Right.
recommends.
Yes. So to actually reverse heart disease, you would want to be on a whole food, plant-based, no oil diet. So the oil, as we covered on that sausage and egg McMuffin, and basically avocado and nuts do have some oil in them. So for people certainly with symptomatic or significant vascular disease, they should avoid avocados, and they should probably avoid nuts. And one of the gurus in this area, is, I think you mentioned, is Dr. Esselstyn, and he basically had people who would basically get chest pain going from where we ate to into this room. And he actually even, I think, tells them to avoid caffeine as well because of that. Yes, and if you go on Facebook, there are, if you just type Esselstyn, there are Facebook groups that, for that specific diet, and yes, for people with significant cardiovascular disease.
Yeah, but I don't know if high blood pressure is significant cardiovascular disease. I've had an echo, stress test, and I've had the test where everything looks good, thank God. My symptom is high blood pressure, but it's not super high, it's like between 130 and 140 over. So I'm not sure if I fall into,
Well, but it's nice that you had the advice of a plant-based cardiologist, isn't it, about that?
yeah.
Good question, thank you. Sorry, did you have a,
Oh, I have two, now I have two questions.
Oh.
So I hear the brain needs fat, so if you eliminate avocados and nuts, where do you get fat for the brain?
you still have 10 to 12% fat in your diet, so
Okay.
it should be
Okay.
adequate, yes.
Okay, so now the first one I was gonna ask is, drinking from plastic water bottles, because sometimes when I'm on the go, so the water in the water bottle has plastic particles in it.
Well, okay, you know those little clear plastic bottles where they come in a rack of 12?
Yeah.
That's the source I was talking about. Yeah, so of
Like
course,
a
it's in a
case.
plastic bottle. And if it's left out in the sun,
Yes.
the amount of plastic goes even higher
Right.
in it. So yeah, you don't want to do that. Like I literally have a stainless steel container, and it's easy to get that, but then it has plastic on the top. I'm kind of OCD, so I go to a place called Blue Spot on James Street North, and I have a thing that actually has no plastic. It just has a silicone seal, and I bring my own water to work with me. But I'm kind of off the edge. I think you and then you, sir. Yeah.
I have migraines, I take medication,
Mm.
and I'm not sure, there's different studies about like chia seeds and flex seeds for if they counteract medication like that. How would you know what do you follow the studies?
I'm not sure, but I would encourage you to go to a website called webmd.com because they have a section on supplements where you could probably type chia or flax and it will specifically tell you about drug interactions with supplements. So yeah, webmd.com, I would type it in there and see what they have to say. Good question. Or you could try and contact the drug company, but
My drug is like a third generation, they found a side effect for my drug is for migraine, it's like an older drug.
yeah, like I say, webmd.com might help you there. Sir, you had a question?
Yeah, I worked in the plastics industry in the 80s. I designed in it, and we had a manual this thick on all the different plastics. And I came home and I said to my wife, whatever plastics you have in the house, get them out of here. They all leach all the time, they never
Exactly.
stop.
And they're endocrine modifiers, and that includes this thing called BPA, which they took out of the baby bottles, but the stuff that replaces BPA does the same thing. And so that includes the cans, and if a can says that it's BPA free, it's meaningless, because the replacement from BPA is the same as the stuff before. So basically all of our food is stored in steel and glass, and whenever we buy stuff, if possible, we try to buy it in glass.
Yep.
We have turned, like if you just go to my website and type endocrine modifiers, you can see the results of a study that looked at the USA and already published data on endocrine modifiers, like come out of plastic. The healthcare cost in the USA in 2010 was 2% of their whole economy. They had 240,000 cases of male infertility, they had obesity, they had diabetes, they had endometriosis, they had autism, they had 11 million IQ points lost. We live in a chemical cesspool. It's
And
just,
often the stuff they replace it with is worse than the stuff
yeah,
they
it
replace
is. That data's out there, but there's no enthusiasm to get this information to the public
No.
because it makes,
Much money.
yeah, good point.
Is there a downside to getting your calcium score done as long as you go somewhere where they don't use a protocol that uses blue dye?
I don't know. I mean, I know, because I'm not a cardiologist, I know the calcium score is used in risk stratification of people's cardiac risk. So I know that. I mean, by definition, there is a little bit of radiation exposure, but I guess it goes down to the ordering physician. But it is a way. There are now scoring systems for people's cardiac risk. So what that score does is it does a CAT scan of your heart, and when people have atherosclerotic plaque, it usually has calcium in it, so they can calculate a score. And actually, I think the new protocols now, it has such good resolution that it can even tell if your vessels are a little narrowed. So it's a very cool test. But I know it's being used by people, so that's cool. So yeah, sorry, behind you.
I just had a question about probiotics, because I noticed that it wasn't on the 12 items.
Right.
So as a vegan, what would you recommend? And I guess personally, I was on antibiotics for 12 weeks, so I'm trying to build up my gut
Right.
health, so.
So, okay, to quote the guy, to quote several researchers in the role of probiotics, quote, "We don't know what normal is." Second quote, "We don't know what's abnormal." So, and I'm including talks that were just a few months ago. That's exactly what they say. This field is so new, we don't have a clue, but it's absolutely tantalizing. You know, it looks like your microbiome affects many aspects of your health. It looks like it can affect your mind as well. It looks like it might play a role in anxiety and depression. But what do gut bacteria live on? They feed on fiber. What's the way to get them the most fiber possible? Have a diet that's whole food, plant-based. I read a book written by 2 PhDs at Stanford, Sonnenbergs, called Good Gut. So the whole book was about the microbiome. And as 2 PhDs who are doing research in the field, what were their conclusions? 1, there is no role for probiotic supplementation in people who are healthy because we don't know enough yet. 2, what you should do is basically have a high fiber diet and eat living foods. So living foods means foods with bacteria in it already. So that would include things like sauerkraut, things like kombucha. The only thing that I would add is that there is data that kimchi is associated with a higher rate of stomach cancer because of the salt in it, because it's pickled. So I'd be leery about having too much kimchi. And then the other thing that they encourage people to take is to take something called prebiotics. So basically that's natural fiber which feeds the good bacteria in your gut. And I'm kind of interested in this. So I came across something called Benefiber, fiberific or Benefiber. So Benefiber is easier to get. This is inulin. Inulin is derived from chicory. It's sold as a laxative. So it's actually good and cheap, and it's from a natural source. So actually at home we sprinkle a bit of this Benefiber on our breakfast because it's way more cost effective. Because you have all the good bugs in you already, so you just feed them. So yeah, but like I say, go on a whole food plant-based diet, but if you really wanted to supplement with something, to me it makes an awful lot more sense to feed them the Benefiber than to spend the money on the probiotics. And they've done studies. They take like 10 different probiotics out of a pharmacy or out of a supermarket, and they send them to the micro lab, and they analyze what's on the label, and they analyze what's in the product, and there's almost no correlation. You're not actually getting what is on the outside of the container. So, sorry, slightly long answer. Yeah.
So, you mentioned B12 supplements.
Okay.
B12 is also added to a lot of nut milks. And so I was wondering the comparison of like, is it equally beneficial or better as a supplement or?
Well, let's just say that if you get B12 deficiency, you are at risk of irreversible, which means irreversible, nerve damage. So basically, if you're going to go on a plant-based diet, get your family doctor to check your B12 level once a year. The body stores 6 to 12 months worth, but I just wouldn't take any risks. You know what I mean? Like, do you have exactly the same amount of nut milk every day? What happens if you change your brand? Like I say, a year's worth of B12 costs less than $20. So we just have 1 pill on Saturday, 1 pill on Sunday. So it's on my website. Just make sure you're getting enough. I wouldn't leave it to the vagaries of nut milk myself. Because it's important. Like I say, it's irreversible nerve damage. People like you go and then Jan. Yeah, go on.
Can you get too much B12?
That's an interesting question. A year or 2 ago, I would have said no, but then one study came up, only one study of smokers, which showed that smokers who had a B12 above the normal range had an increased rate of lung cancer. Now, no one knows what to do with that. No one knows if it's causally involved or not, but once again, if you get your GP to check it every year, they will tell you if you're high, or if you ask them point blank, or just get it done in life labs, you can check it yourself. You find out if you're high, but I'm now a little leery of letting it go high, but it's probably safe, but we don't know. Yeah.
That was my question, because something came through, as you probably know, yesterday from Dr. Grieger on that.
Oh, did it?
And I
didn't
haven't
see
had
it.
a chance to look
I haven't
at
seen
it either.
yet. Oh, so maybe you go to nutritionfacts.com, see if he has something to say.
.org.
I realize you speaking here, you might be preaching to the choir already, but in general in Canada, the US, is the rate of percentage of the population of coronary artery disease, is it increasing?
Well, all I can say is that in the USA, it's still the number one cause. So number one, it's hard. Yeah, I'm not up to date on the actual recent trends. To be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if it's decreasing a bit, because it's my understanding that meat consumption is actually going down in North America. This is, right now, this is just a tiny little group of people, but ironically enough, most people probably don't know what an HMO is. An HMO insures your health and also runs the hospitals. That's what they have in the States. So for an HMO, since they run the hospitals, if people are healthy, they actually make money. So the HMOs are pushing this. There's a huge HMO called Kaiser Permanente. They're into whole food plant-based because it increases their corporate profits. So this, ironically, the capitalistic healthcare system in the USA is waking up to this, whereas our socialized system in Canada doesn't allow a gastroenterologist to refer out patients to a dietitian for any reason whatsoever, including a new diagnosis of celiac disease, which is only treated by a gluten-free diet. I mean, don't get me started. Yeah.
It's a sore point, I can tell.
Yes.
But diabetes is increasing, I believe, right?
Well, because of obesity rates going up, and once again, this is what Gregor's getting into his book, and basically it's the food. In the 70s and 80s, they changed food processing. Basically, processed food started coming in the 70s and 80s.
Right.
And basically, processed food allows you to eat a lot of calories and not feel full. Like if you look at how many calories, like 400 calories of cheese in your stomach is about yay big. Like yay big. Whereas 400 calories of broccoli in your stomach, you can't fit 400 calories of broccoli in your stomach. It's called calorie density. So that's why the side effect of a whole fruit plant-based diet, one of the reasons why the side effect is weight loss. Because you can't eat enough calories to gain, it can be a problem.
All right.
Cool.